Let me tell you about a moment that happens in every financial transaction, every single day, for every person who has ever had money in their hands. It is a moment so brief that most people never notice it exists. It lasts, neurologically speaking, somewhere between 1 and 3 seconds. It occurs between the instant money becomes available and the instant a decision is made about what to do with it. Most people pass through this moment without awareness, without choice, without any sense that something significant is happening. They move from having money to doing something with money in a single fluid motion, driven by habit and impulse, and the automatic machinery of a financial identity that was assembled in childhood and has been running on autopilot ever since. Rich people do not move through this moment, they stop in it. That is the difference. Not the investment strategy, not the tax structure, not the business connections or the inherited advantages or the elite education, though all of those things exist and matter and create real advantages that would be dishonest to minimize. At the level of the individual decision, at the level of the single moment where financial outcomes are actually determined one choice at a time, across an entire working life, the difference is whether a person stops in that moment or passes through it. Whether the moment between having money and deciding what to do with it contains any conscious evaluation at all. Whether the decision that comes out of that moment was made or simply happened, you have already missed it today. Almost certainly you missed it yesterday. You have been missing it, if you are like the overwhelming majority of people on Earth, for every year since you started handling money. Not because you are careless, not because you are unintelligent, because nobody ever told you the moment existed. Because the entire structure of financial education, such as it is, teaches people what to do with money without ever teaching them to pause before doing it. It teaches products and strategies and instruments and accounts. It teaches diversification and compound interest and the importance of starting early. It does not teach the single thing that determines whether any of those products and strategies and instruments and accounts ever get used correctly. It does not teach the pause. It has never taught the pause. And the omission of the pause from every financial education curriculum ever designed is not an accident. It is a structural feature of a system that profits from unreflective financial behavior. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let us start with what the moment actually is, because you cannot use something you cannot see, and the pause is everything. But I want you to sit with that claim for a moment before I explain it, because if you hear it too quickly, you will file it away as an interesting idea and move on with the same financial habits you walked into this video with. The pause is everything, not a useful thing, not a helpful addition to your financial toolkit, everything. The thing that determines whether you are building a financial life or simply passing money through your hands on its way to someone else's investment portfolio. The thing that separates the person who looks back at 40 years of earned income and finds themselves with genuine financial security from the person who looks back at 40 years of earned income and finds themselves unable to account for where it all went. The thing that makes the same income, earned by two people with identical starting points, produce two completely different financial outcomes after 3 decades. Not the amount, not the strategy, the pause. The moment of consciousness inserted between having and doing, that is what this video is about. And I do not know how to make it sound more important than it is, because it is already the most important financial thing I can tell you, and the challenge is not inflating it, but preventing you from deflating it back into a nice idea that requires nothing of you. Let me describe what the moment looks like from the inside of someone who has learned to stop in it, because the description of a thing is useless without the phenomenology, without what it actually feels like to be inside the experience I am asking you to cultivate. The moment begins with presence, not mindfulness in the way that word has been diluted by overuse into something vaguely therapeutic and slightly ineffectual. Presence in the most literal sense, the actual, conscious awareness that money is in front of you and a decision about it is imminent. This sounds trivially obvious. Of course you are aware that money is in front of you, but awareness in the sense I mean is not the passive background recognition that a financial transaction is occurring. It is the active, deliberate pulling of full attention to the fact that this moment matters. That what happens in the next few seconds will have consequences that extend far beyond the transaction itself. That the decision about to be made is not a small thing, even if the amount is small, because the habit embedded in the decision will be made again and again and again across a lifetime, and the compound effect of a million small decisions made from the same habitual pattern is not a small thing at all. That active pulling of attention, that deliberate elevation of a routine financial moment into something worthy of full consciousness, is the first element of the pause. It is the thing that most people never do. Not because they choose not to, because they have never been taught that it is available to them. The world has conspired to make financial transactions feel automatic, effortless, unreflective. The tap-to-pay technology, the one-click purchase, the subscription that renews without notification, the salary that arrives and is allocated to its habitual destinations before the person has consciously thought about whether those destinations are the right ones. All of this infrastructure is designed, not accidentally, but deliberately, to remove the pause from financial transactions. Because the pause is where the consumer becomes something other than a consumer. The pause is where the person stops being a vehicle through which money moves and starts being the director of where money goes. And a person who directs where money goes is a fundamentally different and far less profitable customer for every industry that depends on unreflective financial behavior. So the first thing to understand about the moment is that the entire modern economy is structured to prevent you from finding it. And finding it anyway, inserting it deliberately into your financial transactions against the grain of an environment designed to eliminate it, is a small act of rebellion that produces over time one of the most consequential financial advantages available to any ordinary person. I want to linger on this point because I think its implications are more profound than they appear on the surface. The elimination of the pause from financial transactions is not a byproduct of convenience. It is a design objective. Every innovation in payment technology for the past 20 years has been aimed, deliberately and measurably, at reducing the friction between desire and transaction. Tap to Pay removed the physical act of counting cash. One-click purchasing removed the checkout process. Auto-renewal subscriptions removed the periodic decision to continue. Buy now, pay later removed the immediate experience of cost. These are not neutral conveniences. They are the systematic dismantling of every natural point in the purchase process at which the pause might have occurred, at which a person might have stopped, even briefly, and asked whether this was what they actually wanted to do with their money. The financial industry, the retail industry, and the technology industry have spent hundreds of billions of dollars collectively ensuring that the journey from desire to transaction is as frictionless, as unreflective, as habit-driven, and as emotion-driven as possible. Because a consumer who pauses is a consumer who might not buy, and a consumer who does not buy is not a productive unit in a system designed around consumption. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is publicly documented strategy. The entire field of behavioral economics has been deployed, not primarily to help people make better financial decisions, but to help businesses extract more revenue from people who are making unreflective ones. The nudges, the defaults, the anchoring, the loss aversion, exploitation, the social proof, the scarcity cues, all of it is aimed directly at the moment between having money and deciding what to do with it. And all of it is working to ensure that the decision made in that moment is the one that benefits the seller rather than the buyer. You are inside a system that has been precision engineered to ensure that the pause never happens. And the first step toward financial freedom is the recognition that the pause must be deliberately engineered back in, against the momentum of an environment that has invested enormously in eliminating it. The second element of the pause is the question. Not a complicated question, not a 10-step evaluation framework that requires a spreadsheet and 30 minutes of analysis. A single question, asked quickly and answered honestly, in the 1 to 3 seconds between having the money and deciding what to do with it. The question is this: does this decision move me toward the financial life I want, or does it move me away from it? That is all. That is the entire intellectual content of what separates rich people's thinking from everyone else's thinking in this moment. Not a brilliant analysis, not a sophisticated calculation of expected returns and risk-adjusted outcomes, a single directional question asked at the moment of decision, toward or away, building or depleting, consistent with where I am trying to go, or inconsistent with it. And the answer, for most financial decisions, is not difficult to determine. You do not need a financial degree to answer it. You do not need market knowledge or investment expertise, or access to information that ordinary people do not have. The person deciding whether to finance a new car, they do not strictly need, knows if they stop to ask, that the car payment plus depreciation plus insurance increase moves them away from financial freedom, rather than toward it. The person deciding whether to put this month's surplus into an investment account or spend it on a vacation they can barely afford, knows, if they stop to ask, which direction each of those choices points. The knowledge is not the gap. The gap is not about information. The gap is the pause that would make the question possible. And the pause is the gap between you and the financial life you want. But let me go deeper into what makes the question so powerful, because the simplicity of it conceals a mechanism that is doing far more work than it appears to. When you ask a directional question, you are doing something that the habitual response never does. You are activating your prefrontal cortex in a context where, without the question, the decision would have been made entirely by the more automatic, more emotionally reactive, more habit-driven systems of the brain. The habitual response to money does not involve the part of the brain that does planning, that considers future consequences, that evaluates options against stated goals. It involves the part of the brain that recognizes familiar patterns and executes familiar responses. The tap to pay, the one click, the renewal confirmation. These are not decisions. They are pattern executions, and pattern executions do not consult your financial goals. They consult your financial habits, which were formed by a version of you that had no particular financial goals at all. The question is the interruption. It is the circuit breaker that prevents the pattern execution from completing without at least one moment of prefrontal engagement. And one moment of prefrontal engagement, even brief, even incomplete, is enough to introduce the possibility that a different decision might occur. The question does not guarantee the right decision. Some of the time you will ask it and still choose the habitual response. That is fine. That is not a failure. That is the process. Because the next time you will ask it again, and the time after that. And, somewhere in the accumulation of asking, the answers begin to influence the decisions. The decisions begin to diverge from the habits. And the divergence, small at first, grows across time into the kind of financial life that the habits alone were never aimed at producing. Because without the pause, the question is never asked. The car is financed because the car is appealing, and the financing is convenient, and the payments fit in the budget, and there is no moment of conscious evaluation where the long-term direction of the decision is weighed against the short-term appeal of the thing. The vacation is taken because it is deserved, and the card has room on it, and everyone else is posting their travel photos, and there is no pause in which the question about direction has the space to be heard. The decision is made before it is evaluated, which means it is not really made at all. It is executed. By the habit, by the impulse, by the version of the person that was formed before they had the capacity to choose it deliberately. And the execution produces outcomes that accumulate into a financial life that was constructed not by choice but by default. By the sum of a million unpaused moments, each one unremarkable, the totality of them devastating. Now I want to go deeper into what happens during the pause for someone who has developed the practice, because describing the question is only the beginning. The question is the portal. What the pause actually contains for someone who has been inside it long enough to know its full geography is something far richer and more complex than a simple directional check. The pause contains the future self. This is the psychological technology that the most financially effective people deploy in the moment between having money and deciding what to do with it. And it is also the technology that is most completely absent from how ordinary people make financial decisions. The future self is not an abstraction. It is not a vague idea of the person you might someday be, a retirement-age figure too distant to feel real, too hypothetical to carry emotional weight in a present-tense decision. For the person who has developed the pause, the future self is a present reality. It is a vivid, specific, emotionally real version of the person they are becoming, sitting at the table of every financial decision, as a stakeholder who has as much claim on the outcome as the present self does. And that future self has a very clear and very consistent position on most financial decisions. It wants the present self to build rather than consume. It wants the present self to deploy rather than spend. It wants the present self to resist the impulse that provides immediate relief and choose instead the action that provides long-term compounding. And because the future self is real and present in the pause, its voice is audible. Its preferences are felt, and they compete with real force against the present self's preferences in the moment where the decision is being made. The research on future self-connection is compelling and underutilized in financial education. Studies in behavioral economics consistently find that people who have a vivid, emotionally connected relationship with their future self make measurably better financial decisions than people whose future self feels distant, abstract, or essentially like a stranger. When your future self feels like a stranger, you do not feel obligated to act on their behalf. You spend the money the stranger would need, in the way you would spend money that belonged to someone you did not know well, and did not feel particularly responsible for. When your future self feels like someone you know and care about, someone you feel accountable to, the dynamic shifts entirely. Spending money they need becomes something that carries a felt cost. Deferring investment becomes a form of negligence towards someone who is counting on you. And the pause becomes the space in which that accountability is exercised, briefly but consistently, in decision after decision, building the habit of future self-loyalty that the wealthy demonstrate, not because they are more virtuous, but because they have built the neural connection that makes the future self feel real enough to influence present behavior. The wealthy are not better people than everyone else. They are not more virtuous or more self-disciplined or more deserving in any cosmic sense. But in this specific respect, in their relationship with the future self, they have developed something that most people have not. They have made the future self real enough to have influence. And that influence, exercised in hundreds of paused moments every year across decades of financial decision-making, produces outcomes that look from the outside like superior discipline or superior intelligence, but are actually superior presence. The presence of a future self that shows up to the table. That is the advantage. That is all it is. And it is available to anyone who decides to build it. The pause also contains the cost calculation. Not the price, the cost. These are not the same thing, and the confusion between them is responsible for an enormous amount of the financial damage that accumulates invisibly in most people's lives. The price of something is what you pay for it. The cost of something is what you give up in order to pay for it. Price is a number on a tag. Cost is the entirety of what that number represents, given the specific context of your financial situation and your financial goals. And cost is almost always higher than price, often dramatically so, because cost includes the opportunity cost of what that money could have been doing instead of funding this purchase, multiplied by the effect of compounding across the years between now and when it would have mattered. A $300 pair of shoes has a price of $300. Its cost to a 25-year-old who invests that $300 instead, at an average return of 8% over 40 years, is not $300. It is approximately $6,500. That is the actual cost, not what the shoes cost at checkout. What they cost, given what the $300 could have been doing instead. A $40 a month gym membership that is never used has a price of $40 a month. Its cost over 10 years is not $4,800. It is the $4,800 plus the compounded return on that capital, plus the psychological cost of carrying a commitment that produces guilt rather than health, plus the habit of paying for things you do not use that normalizes financial waste in ways that extend far beyond the specific subscription. Most people never calculate this, not because the calculation is difficult, because the pause in which the calculation could occur never happens. The price is visible. It is the number on the tag, the amount on the receipt, the charge on the statement. The cost is invisible. It lives in the future, and you cannot respond to information you cannot see. The wealthy do not calculate this explicitly for every purchase, for that would be paralyzing and joyless, and is not what I am describing. What I am describing is the presence of a general, embodied, intuitive understanding of the cost dimension that comes from having paused enough times to have internalized it as a felt sense, rather than an explicit calculation. The person who has spent years stopping in the moment between having money and deciding what to do with it develops a relationship with cost that operates quickly and without deliberate arithmetic. They feel the weight of the future in present decisions, not with anxiety, with the quiet clarity of someone who has paid attention long enough to know what things are actually worth, and that felt clarity, applied consistently across the thousand small decisions of ordinary financial life, is worth more than the most sophisticated investment strategy ever devised, because it operates at the level of the decision rather than at the level of the allocation. And decisions are upstream of allocations the way roots are upstream of branches. Now I want to address the objection that is sitting in the back of your mind right now, because I have been describing the pause as if it is simple, and simple things, when they are described clearly, tend to produce in the listener a skepticism about whether they are actually as significant as claimed. If it is just a pause, just a second or two of conscious attention before a financial decision, how transformative can it really be? Surely the problem is more complex than that. Surely the wealthy have access to information, to systems, to advantages that cannot be reduced to a 2-second cognitive habit. You are right that wealth involves many factors. You are right that structural advantages, inherited capital, education, networks, timing, and circumstance all play real roles in financial outcomes that a pause cannot substitute for. I am not claiming the pause is sufficient. I am claiming it is necessary. And I am claiming it is the necessary element that is most universally missing from the financial lives of people who never build what they want, regardless of income, regardless of education, regardless of how hard they try, or how many financial strategies they learn about. The pause is the gate through which all other financial improvement must pass. You can know everything there is to know about investing and have no pause, and the knowledge will not convert into action because there is no moment in which the knowledge is consulted before the habit executes. You can have the perfect budget, the optimal savings rate, the diversified portfolio, and no pause, and you will undermine every one of those systems. The first time a desire arises strongly enough to bypass the plan, which is a matter of days in most cases, because desire is always present, and plans without pauses are no match for it. You are wrong that the pause is therefore small, because the pause is not small in the way that a spark is not small. A spark is a tiny thing. It is a brief flash of heat and light that in isolation produces nothing dramatic, but a spark applied to the right material, in the right conditions, produces a fire. And a fire, maintained and fed and directed carefully, warms a house or powers an engine that transforms everything it touches. The pause is the spark. It is not by itself the wealth. It is the thing that ignites the process that builds the wealth. Without it, you have the material but no fire. You have the income, the potential, the desire, the years of working life that contain within them everything needed to build something extraordinary, and none of it catches because the spark never occurs. Because the moment between having money and deciding what to do with it passes without ever being inhabited. And I want to add something specific about the compounding effect of the pause that is rarely discussed but is, in my view, the most mathematically significant thing about it. The pause does not only improve individual decisions, it builds over time a dramatically different relationship with money that produces better decisions automatically without the friction of conscious override. Every time you pause, you are adding a small amount of evidence to the system that governs your financial identity, evidence that you are a person who considers before acting, evidence that money is something you direct rather than something that moves through you, evidence that the future self is a real stakeholder in present decisions, and that evidence accumulates, decision by decision, into an identity shift that eventually makes the pause unnecessary, because the evaluation it was performing has been internalized into the automatic response. The goal of the pause is ultimately to make itself redundant by building the kind of person for whom the right financial decision is the automatic one. But that building takes years of pausing. You cannot shortcut to the automatic wisdom without doing the work of the deliberate pause that eventually produces it. I want to be very precise now about when the moment occurs, because one of the most common misunderstandings of what I am describing is the assumption that it only applies to large financial decisions, that the pause is appropriate when you are deciding whether to invest a significant sum or make a major purchase, but that applying it to small daily transactions would be obsessive and unworkable, and would transform ordinary life into an exhausting sequence of deliberations about whether to buy a sandwich. This misunderstanding matters because it allows people to maintain the pause as an ideal for important decisions, while continuing to pass through it unreflectively in the thousands of small decisions that, taken together, determine far more about their financial outcomes than the occasional large ones. The moment occurs every time money is in your hands. Not metaphorically, literally every time. When you reach for your phone to tap for a coffee, when you scroll through your subscriptions and dismiss the renewal notification without looking at it, when you see a sale notification and feel the familiar pull toward clicking, when you get to the checkout and add the thing you were not planning to buy because it was positioned to catch you at the moment of lowest resistance and highest dopamine availability, when the direct deposit clears and you feel the brief expansion of possibility that money in an account produces before the habitual spending pattern immediately contracts it back to zero, when your phone buzzes with a limited time offer and you feel the manufactured urgency that someone designed specifically to bypass your reflective capacity, all of those moments are the moment. All of them contain the pause that you either stop in or pass through, and the pattern of whether you stop or pass, aggregated across every one of those moments, across every day of your working life, is the pattern that determines your financial trajectory far more powerfully than any investment strategy or financial plan ever could. This is also why financial plans so often fail, not because they are bad plans, but because a plan that lives on paper is made once and applied never, because the person who made the plan continues to pass through the moment without pausing, and the decisions that actually get made come from the habits and the impulses and the installed financial identity rather than from the plan. The plan required the pause to implement. The pause was never cultivated. The plan stays on paper. The habits continue undisturbed. And the person who made the plan looks at it 6 months later with a mixture of guilt and confusion and cannot explain why they knew what to do and did not do it. They could not explain it because they did not understand that the gap between the plan and the behavior was not a gap in knowledge or commitment or willpower. It was a gap in the pause. The plan assumed a moment of reflection that never occurred. And without the reflection, the plan was always a document rather than a practice. So let me now be specific about how you build the pause. Not because it is complicated, because simplicity, offered without specificity, tends to dissolve in the space between reading and acting. You need something concrete to carry out of this video. if anything is going to change. And change requires concrete action, not general inspiration, because inspiration is a feeling, and feelings are temporary, while habits are structural, and structural things persist, whether you feel motivated on any given day or not. The first step is the flag. You need to decide, right now before you finish this video, on a specific dollar threshold below which the pause is not required and above which it is mandatory. Not a high threshold, a low one. $50, $20, whatever number represents the level at which a purchase is habitual enough to be automatic, but significant enough that a different choice would begin to matter in aggregate over a month, a year, a decade. For every time a financial decision above that threshold presents itself, you flag it, internally, silently, not dramatically or performatively, just the recognition that this is a moment that merits the pause rather than the automatic execution. This single commitment, applied consistently for 30 days, will change your relationship with money in ways that compound forward from the moment you begin it. Not because the threshold is magic, but because the act of flagging, repeated enough times, begins to transfer into an intuitive alertness that eventually operates below the threshold too. The habit of noticing becomes the habit of noticing everything, and like Dane Shiv called, and noticing everything is the prerequisite for directing anything. The second step is the question made physical. Write the directional question on something you will see every day. Not on your phone lock screen, where it will become invisible through repetition in 4 days. Not on a sticky note on your monitor that you stop seeing within a week because your brain habituates to it and removes it from conscious awareness. On something physical that you encounter at the point of decision, rather than the point of reflection. A card in your wallet, a note folded behind your credit card, something that requires you to physically encounter it in the moment you are reaching for the means of payment, at exactly the point where the habitual response is about to execute without your awareness. The question is the one I described earlier. Does this move me toward the financial life I want, or away from it? Simple. Directional, answerable in seconds. The asking is the hard part. The physical reminder is the mechanism that makes the asking more likely to actually occur in the moments when it matters, rather than in the moments when it is easy. The third step is the one that accelerates everything, and it is also the one that requires the most honest self-observation. It is the deliberate weekly review. Once a week, briefly, not for hours but for 15 focused minutes, you look at the financial decisions you made in the previous 7 days, and you evaluate them against the directional question without judgment and without the goal of producing guilt. The goal is pattern recognition, to see, clearly and without the distortion of emotional proximity to the decisions, where the pause occurred and where it did not, where the question was asked and answered honestly, and where the habitual response simply executed before any evaluation was possible, where the future self showed up to the table and where it was absent. This review is the feedback loop that converts the pause from an idea you intend to practice into a skill you are actually developing. And skills, unlike intentions, compound. The review makes the pause more likely in the following week, which makes the next review more interesting, which makes the next week's pauses more frequent and more effective, which builds the identity of someone for whom pausing before financial decisions is simply how they are, not how they are trying to be. The wealthy did not always know how to pause. They learned, either from someone who taught them explicitly, or from painful financial experience that created enough clarity to permanently change their relationship with the moment, or from the kind of mentorship that occurs when a young person spends time around someone who handles money differently and absorbs through observation a different set of automatic responses. They learned that the moment exists. They learned to stop in it. They practiced stopping in it until the stopping became reflexive and the unreflective execution became the anomaly rather than the norm. And here is what it looks like when the practice has matured into mastery. Because I think most people imagine the financially disciplined version of themselves as someone who is constantly white-knuckling their way through temptation, straining against desire with grim determination, and finding no joy in the restraint. That is not what it looks like. That is the early stage, when the pause is new and effortful, and the old habits are still pulling hard against it. The mature stage looks nothing like that. The mature stage looks like ease. It looks like a person who genuinely does not feel the pull of the purchase the way they once did. Not because they have suppressed the desire, but because the desire itself has changed. Because the things that feel rewarding to them have shifted, gradually and irreversibly, toward the things that build rather than the things that consume. The notification from the brokerage showing the account value growing does not produce less satisfaction than the notification from the retailer showing a sale. For the person who has practiced the pause long enough, it produces more, the quiet watching of compound interest, doing its work does not feel like sacrifice compared to the excitement of spending. It feels like its own kind of excitement. The excitement of a person who is in motion towards something they actually want, whose financial life has momentum and direction, and the kind of forward pull that makes the daily decisions feel aligned, rather than contested. That is the full arc. Unawareness, to practice, to mastery, to the point where pausing is simply how you are with money. The arc is available to you. It begins where arcs always begin, not with the full mastery, not with the practice skill, but with the first deliberate stop. The first time you feel the pull of the habitual response, the automatic motion toward the spend or the swipe, or the avoidance of the investment decision, and you stop, just stop, and ask the question, and listen to the answer, and act on it, or at minimum, hear it clearly enough, that the decision you make is a real decision rather than a habit that decided for you. That first stop is not dramatic. It will not feel like a transformation. It will feel like a small, slightly awkward interruption of a smooth and familiar process. But it is the beginning of everything that follows. And everything that follows, across the months and years and decades of a financial life, deliberately built rather than accidentally accumulated, is the difference between the two people I described at the start. At the start, the person who looks back and cannot account for where it all went, and the person who looks back and sees, clearly and with quiet satisfaction, the architecture of something built one paused moment at a time. That arc is available to you, starting from wherever you are, starting today if you choose. I want to close by returning to the title, because the most important word in it is not the word rich, and it is not the word moment. The most important word is already. You have already missed it. That word carries a weight that I placed there deliberately, because the feeling it produces, the slight sting of having missed something, the mild but real discomfort of being too late for something that mattered, is itself a form of the pause. It is a moment of consciousness about money and time, and the decisions that were made without full awareness in the space where better decisions were possible. The discomfort is the point. Not to make you feel bad, to make you feel something specific enough to produce a specific response. Because every moment you have already missed is also every moment that is still ahead of you, seen from the perspective of your future self looking back. Right now, you are looking back at today from some point in the future. And the question is what you want to see when you look. A day in which the moment passed as it always has, carrying your financial future with it, toward the destination the habit has always been pointed at. Or a day in which something changed. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but genuinely. The first day on which the moment was inhabited rather than passed through. The first day on which the pause occurred. The first day of a different financial life, indistinguishable from the outside, but fundamentally different on the inside, in the one place where all financial outcomes are ultimately determined. In the moment between having and deciding, in the pause that the wealthy stop in, and everyone else passes through. You already know the moment. Pastaf samtue cornes tell, what was a plugsam meeting oren values and ononers parkranalpen, for to push and toll of, portu ortsaldoi, and nojes detzel the moutel dub bed, the worship make quakanwar towards the one, portu makamating. You already know the question. You already know that something about how you have been moving through your financial life has been slightly off, slightly unreflective, slightly more driven by habit than by choice. You have always known this at some level. What you did not have before today was the precise description of where it lives and what it would take to change it. Now you have it. The moment is there. It has always been there. Stop passing through it.